us.
It is my pleasure.
Let's start. What is your name, and what is it that you do, and where are you from?
My name is Gwendolyn Moore. I'm a curator at the Missouri Historical Society, and I am from St. Louis, Missouri, from an historic black community called Mill Creek that has since been destroyed.
Tell me about Mill Creek and what you remember.
I was a child, so my memories of Mill Creek are very pleasant. I remember that I lived on the street, 328 South Garrison. I still remember that. Because your parents beat it into your head. You got to know your address and your phone number.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember the phone number though. But I remember that, we had a very close-knit community. I knew everybody on my street. I remember Miss Collins, who lived across the street, and we really looked up to her because her daughter was Bernice, and she got a scholarship to go to Washington University. I remember Mother Van, who lived down the street, who was like the matriarch of the block. I remember Mr. Allen, who used to come and visit my mother. He was very strict. Cards one day, and he was saying, "Oh, you shouldn't let your children play cards." My mother was very spiritual, but she wasn't really like a Bible thumper. I don't know if that's the right. I want to honor her memory because she was a very spiritual person, very good person. I had a hard-working father. Didn't see him so much because he worked all the time. So we were very close to our mother, and we were very, very invested in that community. And to be perfectly honest, I haven't had a community like that since that time.
You said that you were very invested in that community. So what does that mean for you since you were a small child?
Because, at the time I didn't realize it. Because it was just normal when you're a child. But as an adult, looking back on it, I could see that I really loved my community. I really liked the people that lived on that block, because that block was like your world, know?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was very protective, kind of looked out for you. You always felt safe. You felt secure. It was like, I call it like the bosom of the black community, It was just a good place to live. And it was a place where there were a lot of important black institutions. We had the Pine Street YMCA. I remember the Vashon Community Center. I don't remember People's Finance Building, but that was this really important black commercial building. But I was a kid, so I probably didn't pay much attention to that. I was just listening to the things where you can have fun.
Mm-hmm. So
those are my memories of that community.
Are your parents from St. Louis?
No, my parents are from Mississippi. My mother was from Starkville, Mississippi, and my father was from Columbus, Mississippi. But they met in St. Louis. My mother had come up here basically to go to school. She came up here to go to Vashon High School because in Mississippi, they didn't want to educate black folks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure why my father came. There was a rumor that my father had to leave Mississippi because of a story about his brother was in some kind of altercation with a white man, and my father came to his rescue, and I guess he won the fight, so he had to leave immediately. So he was quite a bit older than my mother. My mother was younger than him. But they met here in St. Louis and got married.
Wonderful. And how do you think that they enjoyed and incorporated into the space and the area? It's a lot different than Mississippi. And so there's cultural differences, even though it may not seem as though, since we're so close.
Yeah, there were cultural differences. They were both segregated. So my mother came from one segregated community to another segregated community. But St. Louis was a different kind of segregation. They call it polite racism,
Yes.
as opposed to that brutal racism that they practice in Mississippi. But my mother, and I think my mother and my father saw it as moving up.
Mm.
It was better than Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, we refer to my mother as a race woman because she was always telling us about, they didn't call it racism back then. She wanted us to be aware of what we had to face in the world as we were going out into the world. as children, we were so protected and shielded, but she knew that that wasn't going to last.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to have to go out and interact with that world out there. She wanted us to know what we were going to face.
Yes.
So she prepared us on how to deal with racism and what we were going to have to, how we were going to have to cope once we became older.
Do you feel like you were well prepared?
I do. As prepared as you get to face racism, you know, it's like I knew what to expect, so I was never shocked or surprised at some of the things that I had to confront.
Wow.
So, but one of the things my mother insisted on being respected, and she taught us that comes first.
Yes.
And don't let anybody disrespect you. She did not let, when you live in the black community, you have these white insurance men and these white, people that are in the community, and she would not allow them to call her by her first name, which they wanted to do, because that's a way of disrespecting you by just calling you by your first name. She would not allow that. They had to call her Mrs. Horn, and they did it.
Good.
And so she was a good role model for us, because we learned just from watching her and how she related to people around her.
Well, let me ask you about more like about the landscape and about St. Louis as a region. Are you a nature person?
You know what? I am. I go out every morning and I run every morning. I like being outside. I like green space. I appreciate green space more and more and more. I think I'm sort of like a budding environmentalist, because I think it's really important that you have trees and grass and maybe not so many cars. I believe that you need to get outside and enjoy nature.
What is it about nature that you particularly enjoy?
I think you feel closer. I don't want to say. You feel closer to nature. I guess that's. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it's like, and there's so much beauty in nature. I think trees are beautiful, and shrubs and grass and flowers. It's exhilarating. And in my community, now Mill Creek, when I grew up, we didn't have a lot of trees and grass and that kind of thing. But as I get older, I'm appreciating it more and more, and I know how important it is, and how important it is to clean the air. Trees clean the air.
Yes.
It beautifies. I'm really getting more and more invested in beauty. How it's really important to have some beauty in your life. And where I live now, there isn't a lot of beauty, and I think that we suffer because of that. And I think it's really important for children to see beauty in their communities. And so I try and keep my little plot as beautiful with lawns and green space and trees. Just because I think it's helpful. And I think if other people see that and they appreciate it, and it's healthy.
It's healthy.
Yeah.
Bottom line. Well, are you growing any vegetables or food?
I do not.
What do you grow?
Well, to be perfectly honest, my neighbor across the street takes care. He does all of that. But he's good. He's a landscaper, and he planted all this, the edging around the lawn, and he's put some. I don't even know what the name of these things that he puts in the yard. But he's very tasteful, But he's just very good when it comes to that. So I just rely on him to do that for me.
Now, when you were growing up as a child, did anyone in your family ever talk about working with the land or having to grow food or any other sustainable practice?
Well, my grandfather was, he started out as a sharecropper. So we did have that background. I don't know as much about my father's parents, but I'm assuming that they were the same. So they had a connection to the land in that way, which I think is a very healthy connection. You have to grow your food. I think it makes you appreciate the food more. And it's
Mhm.
healthy.
It's healthy.
Yeah.
Mhm. So, what is it about St. Louis that keeps you here?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know. I guess it's familiar. I guess that's a terrible way to look at it, but it is. It's familiar. I grew up here. I've lived here all my life, except for when I went away to school for 5 years, and I came back, and I've been here ever since.
Nice.
Yeah. And St. Louis has its problems.
Mhm.
Definitely has its problems, and I always say, there's racism everywhere. So, and maybe this is the racism I know.
Mhm. Mhm. And so, my last question for you is, with your work in history and reminding of us of all the things that we have succeeded in or need to still work on, what is your fuel for that work? What keeps you going about that work?
I think I want to honor the people that have struggled that came before me. One of the reasons I wanted to do that exhibit, because people were always saying that people in St. Louis hadn't done anything, and I knew that was not true. And I knew that people struggled for a long, long time and fought hard against Jim Crow and segregation and racism, and sacrificed a lot. And I want to honor those people. I think it's a great legacy that they left us, and we should know them and respect them. And so that's what keeps me going. And I'm doing that now. I'm constantly trying to research people that have come before me, that have done great things, or maybe even haven't done great things, but have paved the way for us to be where we are, because they sacrificed a lot, and I realize how much they sacrificed.
Yes.
So, I think we should appreciate our elders and the people that came before us.
Yes. I said that was the last question, but I have one more.
Okay.
Who is your favorite historical figure?
Wow, that, I can think of two. One is Ida B. Wells Barnett. I mean, that's the lady. She was fearless.
Yes.
And she did not bite her tongue. She did not care. She would face down white supremacists. She was not afraid. She was combative. She fought for what she believed in. She launched a whole movement. I mean, she is the of all the historical figures. She's one of my favorites, and I guess the other one would have to be Frederick Douglass, because he was a fighter as well, and he had so much to overcome. Well, they both had so much to overcome, and to be so forthright, to not be afraid, to not be intimidated, to stand up to power when so much was aligned against them, and they did not let that deter them. They did not care. They were fighting for their people, which is what we should all be doing, is fighting for our people.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for this interview.
Okay.
I'm so glad you're here in St. Louis with us
Thank you.
doing this amazing work. And I'm so glad that you are already connected to nature. And hopefully will get you growing a fruit or a vegetable.
I would love to. I have a neighbor that gives me, he grows his green peppers and gives me green peppers. So maybe I'm relying too much on other people to do that for me.
You can start one plant at a time.
Okay.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much.
Okay.